All right, so I do see some familiar faces, some prior students from AMP. So welcome back. Good to virtually see you again. Those of you who don't know me, my name is Dr. David Radziris, but I go by Dr. Rad um, at CCAC. I've been working with the nursing department since 2008. And then I've been doing the dosage calc reviews since probably 2012. Um, I have previously written the tests for first through fourth semester at Allegheny campus. So some of my old exams are still within circulation, or at least pieces of it. So when I tell you different things, a lot of it is because I know what you're going to see. And then I'm going to show you how to kind of focus, or at least for the first 2 weeks, on the things you need to know, the things you have to master, and the things you have to practice. And then probably the third week, I'll kind of go over some of the things that you will see next semester, like on how to do flow rates. You won't have to worry about it for this semester, but it might be something to kind of go back to just to so you know what to expect. And then there are also questions that you'll see on ATI. But for the most part, I'm just going to focus on what you should expect to see on your dosage calc exam. So I'm in Blackboard on your 110 Blackboard site, and I'm in the drug calc workshop. So like if you go to that, you can hopefully see that on the left-hand side of the drop-down menu. This is where it gives you the links, the link to my YouTube channel, so you can go back. I have some additional practice tests in my um, the OneDrive shared folder. So you're welcome to pull some of those out. I'm not going to be going on there today. And then as it stands right now, I'll just have these as a standing review session every Wednesday at 1:30, so that you have so there's some consistency, and it looks like there's a decent amount of you that can show up at this time. So I'm glad that this worked out. Um, like I said, I have no fit time, so I usually approximate 30 to 45 minutes, but it could be shorter, it could be longer. Sometimes it just depends on what we've already covered and what questions you may have. All right, so going back to the workshop page, to the practice folder, there's a couple of things. So there's a hard copy, meaning you can open this up and you can print this off at on campus, and you should be able to work through this. So we can work through this, of course, together. And I'll show you how to answer a lot of these questions so that way you're more than prepared for these questions. I will say, though, that your test is going to be on Blackboard unless that's changed. And so you won't necessarily need to worry about this part too much, other than just practicing how to do the uh, the types of questions that you will see um, going into the next couple semesters. I also have like a tips that I'm going to go over here in just a little bit, and then your blueprint, which is updated. Looks like it's updated every 2 years. And then what we'll probably focus on today is the practice exam that you have access to, where you can go on and get feedback for making sure you're doing the work correctly. So before we get started, let me just pull up this blueprint. A couple of things that you need to worry about. Like, first of all, on I guess it's on September 29th, during your skills lab, you're going to be tested on math. It's a 25 question test. Of those 25 questions, you can miss two and pass with a 92% or better. So they want you to pass with an A or better. If you do not pass the test, they're going to make you remediate, a lot of times with me or maybe one of the math cafe tutors, and then you're gonna have to retake. You're gonna take a retest. And then if you don't pass the retest, then from what I understand, they're going to take you out of the 110 class, and you're gonna have to repeat it another time. So it is important. They do want you to stay on top of this. This is not just something that you can just kind of skim over. So just make sure you do it. You should be able to, you have all the skills with all the previous science classes that you've taken to even get into the nursing program to do these just very well. It's just sometimes you forget. And that's what I'm here for, is to try and help remind you, because this is not something you're going to see during class. This is all basically on your own. Okay. So you need to pass with a 92% or better, which means you can only miss 2 questions out of 25 questions. You get an hour to take the test. For the first semester, it's a Blackboard test. You'll answer the questions and submit. It's not multiple choice. Second, third, and fourth semester, it'll be a paper test that you'll get week 1 of the semester. So as soon as you kind of come in, you go into your skills lab for that semester, you're taking a test that day. Okay. And then I also do review sessions for second and third and fourth semesters the week prior to classes starting. And I have a wealth of material on YouTube now on the OneDrive folder that you can get a head start if you feel like you need to. All right. So what should you expect on your 110 folder or your 110 test? So what I'm going to do is just zoom in on the 110 questions. So throughout the course of the test and while you're studying, you need to know how to work with household measurements and converting between systems, meaning you need to know how to go from milligrams to grams, micrograms to milligrams, milliliters to liters, milliliters to teaspoons, tablespoons to milliliters, ounces to milliliters. Um, you're going to need to know how to do those conversions, and we're going to practice a little bit of that today. You're also going to need to know how to convert like pounds to kilograms. So that's kind of within the first 8 questions, or the 8 types of questions are just your unit conversions. Okay. Um, you're going to need to know how to do a intake output calculation. So that what we do for 110 at the Allegheny campus is you're going to calculate a fluid replacement volume after a patient has voided. So they've peed out a certain quantity, and you're gonna calculate the replacement based off of a known replacement volume. Okay. So we'll talk about that. At some of the other campuses, they do an intake, so there'll be a list of food and drink, and they have to convert all of the food and drink to milliliters, and then calculate the total milliliters given. And if I think of it, I'll show you what one of those looks like next time. Um, Probably one of the straightforward things that you probably are already familiar with are just calculation of oral-based medications. When you always hear the thing like take two, the doctor said take 2 of these and call me in the morning. That's essentially what you're learning in this, is how to do those calculations. So if the doctor orders 500 milligrams of something and you have two and that you have tablets that are 250 milligrams, then you know to give them 2 tablets for however often you're supposed to give them. And I'll show you how to break that down. Parenteral medications, for the most part, are going to be exactly the same thing as oral medications, in that if you think about a liquid suspension, you're going to drink something down. Usually it's going to be measured in teaspoons. We're going to work towards milliliters. Your injectables, your parenteral medications, subcutaneous, intramuscular, these are going to be also ml calculations, milliliter calculations. How much milliliters are you injecting into your patient? There'll be a couple reconstitution questions. And we'll talk about that. A reconstitution just means that when you receive it from the pharmacy, it's in a powdered form. You're supposed to add water to it and follow directions on the label. And I'll show you an example of that. And then some insulin dosages, including marking a syringe and being able to read a sliding scale. So we're going to talk about all those things today. Give me 1 second. Let me just move this out of here. All right, don't need that. And I'm done with that. And let's go to the tips. All right, so I'm not going to go through every single thing that's here, but you need to be familiar with these shorthand abbreviations and things like that so that it's not the first time you're seeing it when you look at it. When I go through the review, you'll hear me read it as the with saying all the words. So I will spell out the abbreviations and try and remind you, but you need to practice looking at those if that's not something you're familiar with. Okay. I think even me, I take for granted prior to when I was an undergrad, I was a pharmacy technician, and so I learned all these when I was an undergrad, and then I just know what they are. I don't like think about them anymore. Obviously, I learned them as I was reading scripts and things like that. And for some of you, this is the first time you're seeing some of this jargon that's listed on here, but you need to be familiar with these, and you'll hear me um, repeat and spell out a couple things. Some of the big ones are these right here, the how often to administer. So like it'll say like Q2H, Q3H, Q4H. So Q is every, 2 is the time, and H is hours. So every 2 hours, every 3 hours, every 4 hours. Then we could then further calculate twice a day, BID, 3 times a day, TID, QID, 4 times a day, and then so on and so forth. So there's a bunch of examples of that. You just need to be familiar with those abbreviations. And you'll see some other ones that really don't have much to do with doing calculations, but sometimes it's helpful. Like if you ever read an order and it said PRN and you didn't know what that meant, it just means as needed. All right. The there's a helpful formula. Um, Many of you have probably been introduced to. It's called desired over have, or ordered over available, or desired over available. I'm not a big fan of this only because it's not the thing that works every single time. But for 110, most of two one what 120, 130, it works just fine. So I don't want to discourage you from using it. I'm going to show you and use dimensional analysis only because it helps for me with organizing it, but I'll show you both ways when we're going through it. All right, helpful tips. As always, read the question. Do not rush to answer the question. Make sure you're reading the question. I just did some remediation with second and third semester students last week, and the biggest thing was they ran through the test too fast. They second guessed and changed correct answers into incorrect answers. Um, they they took they just misread the question because they didn't take the time to just pause, read the question, and make sure you're answering what it's asking you to answer. So if it's asking you how many tablets, don't give your answer in milligrams. Make sure you know to answer in tablets. If it's milliliters, and all those things will be given to you. So, and you'll see examples of that in just a little bit. Um, you need to know your basic conversions. So these will not be given to you. You need to know what these are. You need to memorize. So what I would suggest doing before you sit down to practice, take your basic conversions, write them down, and make sure you're referencing them, and then get in the habit of writing it down. That way, when you see it on your test, or you write it down as soon as you take your test, and then you don't have to worry about memorizing anything. It could just start using it, but it won't be given to you. Okay. So you'll see that 1 gram is 1,000 milligrams, 1 milligram is 1,000 micrograms, a liter is 1,000 milliliters. So when in doubt, 1,000 for at least for your metric system things. 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2 pounds. Then we have teaspoon, tablespoon, ounce, and then I think most everyone already knows about hours. So just make sure you're referencing these things as we kind of go along. There are rules for rounding. Ideally, when you get a final answer, you should have 2 digits in your answer. Now, if you get an answer, let's say you get an answer of 2, like your answer is just 2. They don't want you to write 2.0. They just want you to write 2. So I'm just gonna kind of highlight that. So if your answer is 2, that's your answer. Do not write 2.0. Okay. They don't want you including the trailing zeros, because if you're writing something, then that decimal, everyone writes their decimals a little bit different, and that 2.0 could quickly turn into a 20, and then that could be a problem for the particular medication. Okay. So if it's 2, leave it at 2. However, if you get an answer that's like, let's say it's, 2.3, then that's your answer. Like, leave it at 2.3. Don't round it. Don't bring it down to 2. Just leave it at 2.3. That way you're getting those 2 digits in your answer. So with rounding, let's say you have a number less than 1. If you have a number less than 1, then you do use what's called a leading zero. So if your answer is 0.5, you do want to write 0.5. Do not write 0.5. Okay. They want you to include that leading zero. So on the Blackboard test, a lot of times this is what gets missed, is students will forget to write that leading zero. So they'll just write an answer 0.5 and then move on to the next thing. It saves the answer. Make sure that 0 is there. Otherwise, it'll be something you'll miss. And then I already said no trailing zeros, so don't add that extra 0 after the after the answer. Just leave it as 0.5. Okay. Now, when it comes to rounding, let's move this over here. When it comes to rounding, we want to follow some rules. When you have a volume greater than 1, okay, now this also applies to, like, when we convert pounds to kilograms, that would be considered a number greater than 1. So this is specific for volumes, but it's applicable to other things where you would need to round. And I'll explain that as we kind of go along. So if you have something greater than 1, such as 1.25, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the hundredths place, and then we're going to either round up if it's 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, or leave it alone if it's 4, 3, 2, 1, or 0. So if you get 1.25, you're going to round that to 1.3. That's what they want you to do. If it's 1.24, though, you look at that, it's a small, that number is 4. You're just going to drop that, and then you'd leave it at 1.2. Okay. So that way you have 2 significant numbers, and we don't have that extra third number. We just get rid of it. A lot of this is based off of the syringes that you'll have available to you. So if you have a syringe that only measures to the hundredths place or to the tenths place, then you can't just arbitrarily guess where it is. That's why you're doing these rounding things. Okay. If you have a volume less than 1, meaning it's 0 point something, then again, we want to still follow the 2 significant figures. So let's say I have something like 0.969. I'm going to again look at the number to the right, but this time to the right of the hundredths place. So if that number is 5 or greater, then we're going to round it up. If that number is 4 or fewer, so we look again at here it's a 3, then we're going to leave it as the 9.96. A lot of times what you'll get as an answer I'm just going to write down here. Let's say we get 0.125. Okay, let's just say that's milliliters. If we get an answer like that, then we want to round it to 0.13. Okay. Most of the time, your numbers are going to kind of work out where it's the rounding won't be the tricky part. You might see it a couple times more so later on in later semesters. It's just something to kind of keep in mind and what we're going to see. I will add this now, and you'll hear me say this later on. Let's use this as our example. Let's say I want to convert 125 milliliters to liters. Now, I'll explain how to do this a little bit later on, but the answer would be 0.125 liters. If we're just doing a basic unit to unit kind of conversion like this, going from 125 ml to 0.125 liters, do not round that. Do not round your basic unit to unit conversions. I will show you throughout the practice questions when you are supposed to be thinking about rounding and when not to round. Okay. And I know it's a little bit, it gets a little bit dicey, but really the rounding is more about the application. So if I'm going to be giving a patient a medication, then you might want to think about rounding your answer if it needs to be rounded. Not every answer. In fact, most answers probably won't need to be rounded. If you're just doing just math, just a unit to unit conversion, milliliters to liters, milligrams to grams, micrograms to milligrams, do not round your answer. Whatever it is, leave it alone. And I'll like I said, I'll show you an example of that. Okay. All right. You won't need to worry about this for this semester. So you won't need to worry about drops. Okay. That'll be later on. But if you do see drops, like on your ATI, you can't give someone a partial drop. So it's always going to be rounded to the nearest whole number. Okay. Clear this out. And zoom out. All right. And then these are just some additional helpful equations. Like I said, desired over have, or I call it order over available times your quantity. Volume over time is more for next semester. Flow rate, drop rate is more for next semester. And then I'll show you how I utilize dimensional analysis. Some students who have already had that like it. Some people who have been exposed to it and didn't do so great with it don't like it. So I'll show you a couple different ways. They don't want you to do one particular way at Allegheny campus. So you can kind of do however you want to do your math. Okay. And then I did write these textbook resources because this is where I got a lot of my information from. So you're welcome to, you can pick those up. You probably even find them at the library, like on campus. Sometimes they have, if you ask the department secretary, they might have a couple copies that you can look at, or you can order it on Amazon, of course. Before I move into some of the practice, does anyone have any questions? Okay.
I have a
All right,
question.
so I'm going to close out of this.
I have a
Oh,
question.
go ahead, Toby.
Okay, so my question is, um, let's say for instance, I got an answer of 0.97, or let's say 0.9. So can I round it up to 1, or I can leave it like, no, it's 0.9?
Right. So if we're talking about a milliliter, you want, and if it's a number, so um if you have, let's say you have an answer of 0.97, which is what you just told me. If you had 0.97, like I said, you most likely won't see that as an answer. Yes, that you can round to 1. So if we're talking about milliliters. If it's 0.9, then leave it at 0.9 because there's nothing telling us to round that number up. So, like I said, that's always like that hypothetical question that, at least from the tests that I've seen, and the practice material I've seen, you won't see that as an answer. You won't have to worry about that. But if it does come up like that, usually what you'll see is you'll get an answer that's like, let's say it's like you put in your calculator and you get 24.9999. Like you'll see that. The answer is 25. It was just the way the calculator arranged it or how you typed it in. Um, so if you see something like that, that is your clue that it is the whole number. And like I said, I don't think you're going to see like an answer where you're getting like 1.975 and then rounding that to 2, but that's what you would do because the 7 pushes the 9 up. So, question. All right, so I'm going to close out of this, and then I'm going to go to the practice exam just so you can kind of see what that looks like. And then we'll just work through a couple of the questions. Um, and I'm just going to jump around. I'm not going to answer all the questions. I'm just going to kind of start it. So I should be able to move that over. Okay. So when you're taking this, it does at the beginning of the test, like before I opened it up, it told you just to write the digital answer or the numerical answers. Um, and then for anything that's a half, just leave it as 0.5, like 0.5. So if your answer is 1.5, 1.5 is your answer. Do not when you're doing this, just like I said, don't include the units. The reason I'm mentioning that is because usually I would be the one to tell you right off the bat you need to include your units in your answers, which is true, um, except for when it tells you specifically on a Blackboard test not to do so. But on the paper sheets, the answers and things like that, you'll see that listed as a where you're putting your units down. So the first few questions that you'll get on your test will be these types where you're doing conversion type questions. So you have 1500 milligrams to grams. One of the things you need to remember is that 1 gram is equal to 1000 milligrams. Okay. Um, so that's something that you have to have memorized and practice. Now, there's a couple different ways to answer this. I would tell you just move your decimal point 3 to the left, and then there's your answer. That's one way to do it. And the reason I know that is because I'm dividing by 1,000. So I'd be moving this over 1, 2, 3, and then my answer would be 1.5. Now, not everyone's there, so I like to show you the slow way because it's also a good practice for how to set up any problem if you ever get stuck and you don't know all the different tricks. So when we're doing a conversion and when we do what's called dimensional analysis, the whole purpose of that is just to kind of set up your problem so you can convert your units. So we're trying to get rid of milligrams and we're trying to convert it to grams. So before I do anything, before I write any numbers, I just set up my equation so that I know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for grams, I'm eliminating milligrams. Then because you have it memorized, 1 gram is equal to 1000 milligrams. So you just put the number with the unit. If you've ever been on a test and you've accidentally like multiplied when you should have divided or divided when you should have multiplied, this is a good thing to practice just so you can kind of see what it looks like setup wise. Okay. I don't make those mistakes anymore. And so I know which way it's going. And so I just write it out and then get an answer and then move on. I can't assume that all of you are there. Now, the nice thing is, um, on your test, you'll also have access to a calculator. It's just a basic 10 key calculator. And then you just plug in 1500 divided by 1,000, and then you're going to get the 1.5 grams. Let's say this was, and this will be a challenge for you. So what I want you to do is, if you can, I'm going to write an alternative question using the same kind of milligrams and grams, and then I want you to put your answer into the chat box if you can. Now, if you don't feel confident in your answer, you just put like question, not sure, don't, or just don't answer. And if you don't want to share it with everyone, just send it as a private message to me. I won't say, oh, so and so said this answer. I'll just say what answers are given. So what we're going to do is instead of 1500 milligrams, we're just going to do 150 milligrams. And I want to know how many grams that is. All right. Answers are starting to come in. Good, good, good. Okay. So yeah, you should have gotten, so I will say the one thing. So if you wrote, let's say you answered this question and you typed it into the box over there and you just wrote 0.15, it will get marked wrong. Make sure you have that 0 right there. Okay. So it is important to include that 0.15. But great job, everyone. Good. What about the next one? What would the answer be to this question number 2, the 250 micrograms to milligrams? I just want to see where everyone's at. Okay, that was quick. Cool. All right. So yeah, that would be 0.25 milligrams. Perfect. Okay. Now, one more question. I'm trying to trick you here. What if it was 125 micrograms? How many milligrams is that? There we go. Good. Okay. So I knew I would trick you. So remember, when we're doing like these types of questions where it's just asking you to convert micrograms to milligrams, don't round your answer. So you would get 0.125. Okay. So those of you that put 0.13, I'm glad that you did that because I at least know that you won't make that mistake now on the test because like I said, they'll mark you wrong. Um, Only because the question is specifically about just doing a basic conversion. Okay. That's the whole purpose of that. All right. Let me clear my writing. And then we're gonna keep going down. Let's look at some of these weight-based
I have a
calculations.
question. So
Okay, go ahead.
what is this box for? The box underneath, what is it for?
You put your answer there.
Oh, and
Yes.
we shouldn't put unit, right?
Correct. Yeah. So in the when you go to this um in the on Blackboard, it'll tell you don't just include your numerical answer and then it gives you directions on the before you open the test. What'll happen is if you let's say you go through this and then you'll get feedback on it and it won't tell you the correct answers and then you'll see like you got like 10 out of 25 and you'll be like what did I do wrong? And then I'll ask you, did you put the units in? Yes, I always include my units. That's where you went wrong because it tells you not to, at least for these Blackboard questions. So yeah, you just put your number in the box. So like for this one, I would put 0.25 and then that would be my answer. And it will auto save. Like once I move, it should save, but a lot of times you'll see that listed there indicating that it's saved, but it should save my answer. All right, converting pounds to kilograms, we might have to do some rounding here, and I'll show you why and what that looks like. So when I'm doing something like 165 pounds and I'm converting that to kilograms, I'm going to follow the same methodology I did before. And I'm sorry, my B looks like a 6. Again, you will have memorized that 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2 pounds. So pounds are gone. and it's just a reminder of when to multiply, when to divide. Now, when I take my 165 and I divide by 2.2, I'm going to get an answer of 75. So that's it. That's my answer. So I don't have to worry about rounding or anything like that. I just plug in 75 into the box and I have my answer. Okay. Now, something that if you are somebody that just likes to kind of quickly go through, and then if you've ever multiplied when you should have divided or divided when you should have multiplied, this is a good strategy for you. Um, when we go from the American system to like the Canadian or the UK system, the metric system, we when we go when it comes to weight, the number gets lower. When it comes to height, the number gets bigger. And so when we go from pounds to kilograms, we divide by 2.2. When we go from um uh like height in inches to centimeters, we multiply by it. I think it's the 3.5 or 2.54 or whatever it happens to be. Um, so the number gets bigger, and so it makes it seem like you're taller and skinnier when you go to the metric system. Okay, just another helpful way. What do you guys get when you do question 4? All right, so I'm seeing some answers come across. Let me just plug it into my calculator. All right, so I'm seeing a couple of answers. I think some of you are tempted to include more numbers than they're asking you to do. So if you have a number, remember if you have a number that's greater than 1, and this is primarily for volumes, but if it's a number greater than 1, which all of our weight-based things will be greater than 1, um, you want to round to the 10th. So you should have had on your calculator 53.181818, and it just keeps going. You want to answer that by rounding it to 53.2. So you'll notice that on your calculator, you'll see a whole bunch of decimals. That's your clue that you need to round it. You can't just leave it on. If you get like 54.9999999, then you would want to round that to 55. What about the 182? What will we get for an answer for that one? Yep. Yep. So again, if there's a decimal there, we want to round to the nearest 10th. Okay. Now, some methodologies, and I'll even say like the difference between 82.7 and 83 when it comes to like weight-based calculations, probably not a significant number. But they want you to round your answers to the nearest 10th. So the additional rule is when you're converting between the systems, so when you go from household to metric or metric to household, then rounding is in play. So round to the nearest 10th. If you're going metric to metric, don't round. And household to household, you typically wouldn't be rounding either. Like if you're going from milliliter or ounces to teaspoons to tablespoons to cups to pints to quarts, you wouldn't need to round those. At least I don't think so. Um, all right, let's look at I thought I could move that. Let's look at 6, 7, and 8. So these are ones that students are usually less comfortable with just because it's you haven't quite memorized how to do these things. So 1 ounce is equal to 30 milliliters. 1 teaspoon is equal to 5 milliliters. And then it didn't get asked, but if it did, 1 tablespoon is equal to 15 milliliters. So you like I said, you need to know those things. So this says we're going from milliliters to ounces. We want to do a couple things. 200 milliliters. And if I'm going to convert that to ounces, I need to know, do I multiply by 30 or divide by 30? And what's going to help me determine that when I'm still figuring this stuff out is by, again, setting up a conversion. My 30 is in the denominator, 1 ounce. So that tells me I'm dividing. So I take 200 divided by 30, and I'm going to get some crazy number 6.6 repeating. So 6.6666. It just keeps going on. What will my final answer be that I'll write down here? What do you think? There you go. I've converted you to the rounding mechanisms. Right. So if it looks like it needs to be rounded, that's your clue, obviously, that we need to round it. That's one big clue. Sometimes it's not as obvious, but for the most part, they'll be pretty straightforward. Okay. What about this right here? What would my answer be for a 30 milliliter in teaspoons? What do you think you'd get for that? Now that does say teaspoons, just so we're all on the same page. Some of you are answering for tablespoons. There you go. Yep. So those of you that answered 2, that was for tablespoons. That it says teaspoons. So just so, again, I like to model this just for practice. We have 30 milliliters. I don't want milliliters. I want teaspoons. 1 teaspoon is 5 mil. So 30 or 5 goes into the 30 6 times. It's a nice even number. So 30 milliliters would be 1 ounce, and 30 milliliters would also be 2 tablespoons. So you can kind of see how you can get different answers from the same type of question. And those are good things to kind of challenge yourself with, is what if this was asking, and then change the numbers or the variable. All right, let's see here. I'm going to come back to these. So let's look at like a medication. Okay. So these are, like I said, usually most students do not have problems with these. These are the perfect ones to do, like the desired over have, order over available, and I'll show you how to do that. But let's look at how to read the order. So your order is typically going to be listed first. It's going to give you some question. It's going to give you a statement and then give you a question. So it'll tell you here, your patient receives 500 milligrams, and then it says some letters afterwards, POBID. PO just means by mouth. Okay. It literally translates into per oral. Okay. So that means it's going in their mouth. And BID means twice a day. So 2 times a day. Another way of writing that would be Q12H, which stands for every 12 hours. Okay. So this is like kind of your typical, if you've, and this is an example of an antibiotic. This is a typical antibiotic where you take, one in the morning, one in the evening, one with breakfast, one with dinner, however you're splitting that up. The next thing actually tells you what you're looking for. It says how many capsule or capsules would we give per dose. So the 500 milligrams is the dose. And then the BID is the number of doses per day. So if we're looking just for the dose, we just want to worry about the one time 500 milligrams. If we're talking about, if the question said how many capsules would your client receive or your patient receive per day, then you'd want to include that they're getting 2 doses per day. Okay. So that's when I said earlier on about read the question. Because sometimes when you're doing this stuff and you make a mistake, the reason for the mistake is because you put in per dose when they are asking per day, or you put in per day when they are asking per dose. Most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, they're going to ask you to calculate the per dose. So the next thing is we have to look at our label to figure out what our available is. Okay. So we have our medication. Usually the medication is listed in the order. This one just doesn't list it. It tells us in this big red box 250 milligrams. So that is the strength of each capsule of this medication. Okay. So each capsule is 250 milligrams. So if I give them 2 capsules, 500 milligrams, 3 capsules, 750 milligrams, 4 capsules, 1000 milligrams or 1 gram. Okay. Now, a lot of times you'll see this listed here, the 100 capsules. That just tells you the total amount in the bottle. Okay. So you don't need to worry about that number. The only reason I bring that up because I have a handful of students over the years that will do something with that number. And I always ask them, like, how did you get 0.2 as your answer? That's not even a whole capsule. Okay. So doing ordered over available, my order is what? 500 milligrams. I have available 250 milligrams, and my quantity is per capsule. So I'm just going to abbreviate that cap. And that's just two caps. Usually on a paper test, writing cap or caps is perfectly fine. But if you just want to be on the safe side, just because you never know how particular someone's going to be, just write out the whole word, 2 capsules. Now, question for you guys. Do you think you can give somebody half a capsule? Good. Good, 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 good. Yeah. No, you cannot give someone half a capsule. Okay. A capsule is all or none. So that helps to answer your question about rounding. Like I said, you shouldn't get an answer like where you would have to worry about that. But let's say you got like, 2.75 capsules as an answer, it would be 3 capsules. But saying that, you're not going to have that uh as an answer. They wouldn't even administer that medication if they couldn't get the quantity right. The order wouldn't make sense. Good job. Yes, only scored tablets, scored caplets as well. And then even if it doesn't tell you it's scored, a lot of times if it's a tablet, you can assume that it's scored if it doesn't clearly say, because you're not going to know every tablet that's scored or not. But if you can put it into a pill, like a pill cutter, a tablet will do that. You can't do that with a capsule because the capsule has a mixture of medications on the inside, and you can't necessarily say you're giving half the beads in one dose and half the beads in the other dose. If you have ever opened those up, you kind of know what I mean when I'm saying the beads. But we also all know that we have grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, aunt, uncle who have done the half capsule thing. And so it's not recommended. They're not getting what they think they're getting. And maybe it doesn't matter if it's like a Tylenol or something like that, but it might matter for an antibiotic. Um, so that was an oral-based medication with capsules. This next question, we can actually see the answer here. So this next question is a another oral based medication, but it's in a liquid form. So in a liquid form, we're going to drink it. Okay. So if we're drinking our oral based medication, then we need to be able to know how to solve for that, know how the order is going to be written up, at least are available, and then also how to mark our choice. So like this, I don't know if it's gonna, oh, okay, I can. I just wanted to see. I couldn't remember if I was in a position where I could mark it correctly. So looking at the order, it tells me I have KCl, which stands for potassium chloride. Then it gives me this weird order of 40 milliequivalents. You know that PO means by mouth. You may know that QID means 4 times a day, but if you don't, that's what it means. So we'll just 4 times. With juice, what we have available is potassium chloride 20 milliequivalents per 15 ml. So when you have a liquid-based medication that you're going to like put into either an oral syringe or a cup like we have here, it's always going to be listed as some thing. So like it might be milligrams per milliliter, it might be micrograms per milliliter, it might be units per milliliter, and then here it was milliequivalents per milliliter. But you want to pay attention to that per milliliter amount. The other thing is when you're doing like ordered over available, one of the common missteps is that everyone's kind of super focused on doing the order number over the available number and then multiplying by 1, which for the most part, that's what you're doing. But for this one, if you do it by 1, you won't have the right answer. You need to pay attention to what that quantity is. So for every 15 milliliters, you're going to get 20 milliequivalents of potassium chloride. Okay. So if you only do 1, then you're misrepresenting your available. So how would I write this out? I would take my order over my available times my quantity, which is 15 ml. So it's important that your quantity, that you pay attention to the numbers that are there. Don't just write 1 every single time. Sometimes it is 1. Sometimes it's just, 125 milligrams per milliliter. That's all it is. 250 milligrams per milliliter. That's all it is. But sometimes it's 125 per 5 ml. Sometimes it's 10,000 per 250 ml. Everything's a little bit different. So always write what they tell you for the quantity. Okay. When we do this, cancel out milliequivalents, and we're going to get an answer of 30 milliliters. Now, on a paper test, you're marking your cup on the when you're doing this on the test, they just want you to drop a point. So there's a pretty wide range. You could drop it on the 30 or on the 30 over here. I would just say go ahead and drop it on the line because that's what you would be eyeing when you're actually measuring this out for your patient if you're ever doing that. I have a feeling that your patient's doing this for themselves when they do this, but it's something you should be familiar with of how to do as well. If you put your pointer in the wrong spot, you can clear it and then go back and then put it where you want it to be. But that's where it should go. The nice thing about these cup questions is your answer is on the cup, okay? Because we can't estimate. You can't say 27.5. Like I can't just guess where that is. It's either at 30, 25, 20, 15, 10. That's what it's going to be. There's no shifting away from that. All right, I want to look at one more and then we'll wrap it up for today. So this is another example of a liquid-based medication. It's for Dilantin. So what I want you to do is read the question and then tell me how you would answer this, including the units in your answer. But obviously on here you would just type in the number. Make sure you read the question. And don't forget your units. There we go. So the most common incorrect answer for this, even though you did all the math right, is 10 ml. The reason being is it asks you how many teaspoons. How many teaspoons will you give, not how many ml. Okay. So there are two ways that I would set this up to get to my answer. I would say my order over my available times my quantity, which would give me 10 ml. And then I need to convert that to teaspoons. You know that 1 teaspoon is 5. So we could just say 2 teaspoons. I think everyone's kind of okay with that. Or since I know that 1 teaspoon is the same thing as 5 ml, I could also write this as 250 milligrams over 125 milligrams times 1 teaspoon. And then I'll get my 2 teaspoons as my answer. So you can do it. You can do it either way. I think most people probably do it this way. And then that's perfectly fine. That's the right way to do that. So, all right. So, next week I will just go right into doing the practice questions. And when I run out of these questions, I'll go to the other questions, on the other paper questions. What I would recommend you do between now and next week, is take the practice test, see how you do. If you get 100%, then that should give you a little bit of confidence that you know what's going on. If you don't get 100%, then you know, kind of check what answers you missed, write it down and let me know so I can kind of work through that and show you how I would set those up if you seem like you're like not sure or not 100% on it. Also, if you guess at like 30 or 30% of the questions, like, you're like, I think it's this, and you just guessed it right, make a note of that. I don't want you to guess. I want you to get it right because you know what the right answer is. So, all right. It's 2:30. Like I said, I'll be here for next week as well. And if you have any questions between now and then, please email me. And then I will upload this on Blackboard and you can reference it if you need to later. And thanks for coming.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Hi, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so regarding this